Hello guys, and welcome back to Sahara TV. This is our Inspire segment where we talk to people from all over Africa who are doing amazing things to inspire and help the people around them. Now on the line from Mogadishu, Somalia's capital, we have Ilwad Elman, who is the program director for the Elman Peace and Human Rights Center in Mogadishu. It's a haven for Somali victims of sexual violence. Hello, Ilwad. Welcome to Sahara TV.
Hi, thank you, Tracy.
Thank you for joining us today. So I'm just going to start with talking about the Elman Peace and Human Rights Center that is based in Mogadishu, Somalia. Can you just, talk about the place and, tell us what the overall goal is of the place?
Well, the Elman Peace and Human Rights Center, our headquarters is based in Mogadishu, Somalia, but we have centers and programs that reach throughout south and central parts of Somalia. The center was founded by one of Somalia's pioneer human rights activists, Elman, and he was actually my father. He was assassinated in 1996 for the work that he was doing to help people. So his relentless and unwavering duty to help those that are less fortunate or vulnerable in Somalia did eventually lead in him losing his life. But the Elman Peace and Human Rights Center is a center that's sustained by peace and human rights activists that work against all odds all across Somalia to continue with his mission. And our focus very much is on human rights, on bettering people's lives. We work in development, the economic reintegration of children that are disassociated with armed conflicts, and we work very strongly with survivors of sexual violence and other forms of gender-based violence. We try to spread peace and create a peaceful coexistence for all Somali people.
Great, that's awesome. So you guys are doing a range of things in Somalia. So talk about what your day-to-day operations are. What would a typical day be like for you as the program director of the center?
Well, my main responsibility is that I actually design projects. I do a lot of assessments to figure out what the need is for people. So I design the programs, I lobby to get funding for them, and then I recruit the staff to do the jobs and implement them. But most of my work is very much field level. So I'm always trying to figure out what is the need, what can be done, what can we do as an organization or me as an individual to help other people. And then from there, I design programs.
Okay, awesome. So how do people go about finding the center? What's your outreach like, or is it just sort of like a place that's known for this thing in Somalia?
In Somalia, there's a lot of organizations that work in trying to better people's lives or protect people. But the thing that makes my organization very unique is the way that it was incepted, the founder, the history behind it. And because we are very inclusive with the community, that is very accessible. We have centers everywhere in South Central Somalia. In Mogadishu, that's comprised of 16 districts. We pride ourselves very, very greatly on the community outreach work that we do. So whether it's through flyers or through community outreach work that we do, or even the monitors that we have that live in the host communities and also go there consistently to tell people about the services that we have so that there is that access to the services. We find that our center is very accessible.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. So I know you mentioned that there's a center throughout Somalia. But are there plans to expand a center like this to other African countries?
Very much so. I mean, right now we're only working in South and Central, which is two of the very biggest, most conflict-ridden regions in Somalia, but we do have plans to expand to other places. All of the work that we do is catalytic support. So we go to one place, and when we find that we've intervened there enough, or we've set up structures for the local community there to continue the work that we've done, and we don't necessarily have to have a center present there, but we've started those discussions on ground and getting those action mechanisms in place for people, we move on to another area that's more acute or is left neglected or doesn't have these services. And we are working in Somalia right now as one of the most dangerous places in the world, but if we find that we have enough mechanisms put in place that people can sustain this without our center being present, then I do see there being room to grow to other parts in Africa.
Great. I want to talk to you about the impact that you guys have on or victims or survivors, I should say. Can you talk a little bit about the people that you work with and how they've grown to trust you, your relationship with them, and I guess just the overall you know feeling and relationships with the survivors that you have while you're at the center?
One of our biggest programs that we're running is called Sister Somalia. And Sister Somalia was launched in the summer of 2011, which was just about 4 months before one of the biggest famine and drought epidemics in Somalia, especially in South Central Somalia. We've always been working in human rights and been encountering various supports that we've been monitoring of women and girls that are subjected to gender and sexual-based violence. But until 2011, there were no support mechanisms or no services for women that have been raped or are subjected to these kind of violences. So we decided to create the first center for survivors of sexual violence. It was a rape crisis center. And when we did that in Mogadishu, it was one of the most difficult times. It was not very much welcomed into the community. People thought that women who are subjected to sexual violence or rape, it's just something that happens in life. You just move on. And there were no service available for them. So when we did make the service available, we got an outpour of women. We've served more than 2,000 women or young girls that have been subjected to it. But the experience is always the same. It's a cycle. Whenever I work directly with these women, I see the cycle. At first, they don't want to get help. They just want to remain quiet. Then when they accept the help, they just don't want anybody to know about it. They don't want to pursue any kind of legal recourse to make sure this doesn't happen to anybody else. But with the psychosocial counseling and the various supports that they get from the center, they start to open up. And then we've seen some great success where women actually become ambassadors for change within their own community. And one woman that's been helped by our center helps another woman, and she starts referring them. So we're really not changing, we're just changing the local discussion on survivors of the way it's perceived, survivors of rape. Before, it was very much stigmatized. And I think one of the biggest successes that I've seen within my organization in this program since 2011 is that rape, at least now, it's talked about. It's on the agenda. Everybody knows what it is. What's remaining now is to have actual mechanisms in place to prevent it from happening. But if women can actually talk about it now, that is one monumental milestone I think that we've been able to achieve. And Sister Somalia was very much on the forefront of putting this issue on the agenda and not just sweeping it under the rug.
That's great. Thank you. So you made me think about something. I mean, I guess to the average person, Somalia is seen as like a traditional place. So I want to ask you, is there any pushback from any groups within Somalia who are maybe against the mission that you guys are pushing?
Well, very much so. I mean, I think the situation has changed a lot for the time that we've opened the center. When we first opened it, we had a transitional federal government that was in place. And what we do a lot is we do a lot of media and exposure and raising awareness on the issue so that people cannot ignore it. And along the way, when we did that, it was actually addressed by the most highest members in power in the Somali government, the prime minister at the time and the president at the time, publicly denying that rape does not happen. It is not in the Somali culture. Rape is a well-known weapon of war. So, and it happens even in the most developed of countries. So it was one of the biggest things that we saw, that people are very much against it. And then after, we found that people became more, they accepted that it does happen, but they still were not open to women getting supported because they felt that it was just maybe glorifying women that are survivors of rape and that they should just be hidden and they should be shunned and they should just stay in their homes if something does happen to them. So then we received a new government, a federal government, the first federal government actually in 22 years in Somalia. And it was very promising to see that the president, one of the first things that he did was express the importance of addressing this issue that he accepted does happen, women getting raped in Somalia indiscriminately. So he said that, although we don't condone the death punishment, but he said that every convicted rapist would be punished to death. The first woman, after that message he made publicly, the first woman that came out openly and talked about being raped by government soldiers or men in government uniforms, she was actually arrested herself by the government and sentenced to 1 year for reporting a rape. The journalist who had spoken to her also was sentenced to 1 year. After a local and international outcry and a lot of movements from the civil society, they actually ended up just changing the sentencing. and letting both the journalist and the woman go. But the message that sent and the amount of it was a huge setback for the first woman to actually come out and talk about being raped and trying to seek justice, and her ending up in jail. It sent one loud message from the government that if you do talk about rape openly and you have experienced this, there's a 50-50 chance of either you ending up in jail or the perpetrator ending up in jail. And that's a gamble that women that have just been subjected to rape were not willing to partake in. So the challenge continues, and Somalia was recently ranked as the second worst place in the world to be a woman. And I think that speaks volumes of the situation and the extent of the female suffering in Somalia.
It's true. Thank you. So I'm gonna just ask you, just overall, just in general, about Mogadishu and being back in Somalia. I mean, here in the States, we read that the country is recovering and there are developments. But in your eyes, what is social life like in Mogadishu? Is it getting better? Can one go outside normally and enjoy oneself?
Well, is it getting better? Is it improving? That's a difficult question to answer because I've been here for almost 4 years now. When I first came here, the curfew was about 1 p.m. in the afternoon. I would wake up in the night sometimes because I would think a mortar or something was literally like ripping the roof off of my house. It was flying bullets, straight bullets everywhere, and that was just the norm. But now I can stay out of my house until around 11 p.m. I can drive, I can walk everywhere, and in that regard, yes, there are improvements, but I feel the situation has just changed. I can't necessarily say that it has improved completely because there's not so much of a direct conflict happening where there's no direct front lines anymore, but there's still a lot of guerrilla attacks that cause a lot of insecurities. But
so let me ask you
it
then:
has
Are
changed in
you
the sense.
were you afraid then for your life, and how did you overcome that fear at that time?
I think that, well, I believe that, like many other people in Somalia, believe that everybody has a time that they're going to die. But if you consistently think about the fear of and all the various factors in place and really think about where you are and where you're working, then you do become afraid. But I don't think my situation has changed this as it has. It's the same for me now as it was 4 years ago because the work that I do, working in human rights, it's something that nobody really approves of. I mean, the government forces don't necessarily want anybody talking about the violences that are coming from their end. Neither do the opposition groups. It's difficult to be working in human rights in Somalia. There's been a lot of assassinations and kidnappings of people who work in NGOs. So it's something that that makes your job all the much harder.
Exactly. So I was reading about you on the internet, and I read that, unfortunately, your father passed away, and he didn't have protection. He didn't walk around with protection, and because of that, he was maybe an easy target. And I want to ask you: it seems like you're obviously following in his footsteps, but do you feel like you need protection? Do you have protection in Somalia as a human rights activist?
Well, I think his ideology and like his approach was that what got him assassinated was that he was working relentlessly with children that were involved in armed conflicts and actually demobilizing child soldiers that were working with the warlords, giving them better opportunities, giving them skills, and giving them money. There was no reason for them to be working with the warlords. Clearly, the people who were profiting from the conflict did not agree with that, and he was killed. People did tell him all the time that he should get protection and that people were, because of everything that he did for the community, people were so prepared to literally die for him and guard him with their lives. But because the message he was preaching was don't arm yourselves, educate yourselves. And he had a very positive motto that resonates 16 years after his passing, which was drop the gun, pick up the pen. He didn't want young men to guard him with their lives. So for that reason, he can't preach that message and still have them guarding him with the weapons. So he didn't have that, and it did lead to him being killed. But I in my life, I don't believe in having armed soldiers to guard you, because a lot of the times the people that are guarding you, it's because they are destitute. It's because they haven't had any other alternative opportunities for livelihoods. So the average salary that a soldier in Somalia makes is $100, and it's inconsistent pay that they get. So I don't think that by giving $100 for a soldier to guard me with his life is worthwhile. And the way I work also, it allows me to, I'm very much on ground. I I don't ride around in fancy cars. I don't have escorts, government escorts, and like soldiers to guard me, because I don't think I'd be able to do the work that I do the way I do it. I'm not somebody who just sits at a desk or just writes all the time or just is detached from the community I'm working with. If I was, then I'd have to have the guards, I think. But when you're working in the community, you become part of it.
Yeah, I see. Thank you for sharing that. I want to ask you about your mother. How is she responding to the success of the center today? Like, what's her reaction?
She's very happy about. She's very happy about the success of the center, and yeah, I mean, it's exciting always to get acknowledged for the work they do, and doing it in the most difficult of circumstances. It's encouraging, and I think all of the success, she sees it as encouragement, because you do need that sometimes to do and continue to be motivated for the work that you're doing. And it also gives us the platform to talk about the various issues that are being concealed in Somalia, and gives us an international platform to raise awareness. And I think that's one of the most important parts of that.
Thank you. I want to ask you about your move from Canada back to Somalia. I mean, many people would say, wow, that's very bold of her to move from Canada back to Somalia. You know, can you just explain that moment to me? Like, what was the driving force to you saying, you know what, I'm going back home?
I think, well, when I first decided to come and move to Somalia, I was very young. I was only 19 years old, and I hadn't seen my mom for several years. We'd always hear from her on the other end of the line. You'd always hear gunshots, you hear bombings, and sometimes the call would be interrupted, and you never know when you're going to hear from her again. It was a very, very difficult and scary situation to be in, but I wanted to visit her. I think I wanted to just be assured and just understand what her day to day was, her reality. What was it like? What was she going through? Because I couldn't fathom it on the other end of the phone. So when I first came, it was initially meant to be a holiday or a visit to my mom for just 3 months, but I started working with her, and then I understood. Everything just became so much clearer as to what she's doing in Somalia, and it became addictive. You know, one input, one thing that I did in one day changed somebody's life. You can't get the same. I couldn't see myself going back to Canada and not doing that. I felt guilty almost, you know?
Yeah, that's really amazing. I mean, so how old are you now?
I'm 23.
You're 23, so you're still very young, and you're doing such amazing things in Somalia. And with that idea, you know, your entire family are like big inspirations for anyone around the world, and Africans especially. And I just want to ask you, you know, how can we, or what do you think the ways are that we can motivate other Africans to sort of pick up the torch and develop ideas like this, or develop centers like this, you know, that could be created in their own respective countries?
Well, I think it's a lot easier than people think it is to actually do something for the community. I've had a lot of people reach out to me and say that I wish I could do something like that, or I'd love to go back to my country and do something like that. And that's why I'm very active, like on social media, and giving people a face behind the cause, and just actually writing stories or showing pictures about what it really is like. And it's not just a program, but it's actually directly affecting people. And the way I do things, I try to talk about it so that people from wherever world they're from, whatever country they're from, they can understand it. They can look at the pictures and understand that it's changing somebody's life, and this is how it was done, so that they could emulate that. But when you think about going back home, especially being raised somewhere else, it seems like almost next to impossible, unless you see somebody you can relate to doing it. So I've had a lot of young people from different countries reaching out to me and asking about what it was like for me. And I talk to everybody that reaches out to me, because I think that people, unless they know what it's like from somebody on ground, they may not be as motivated to do it, or they can convince themselves or talk themselves out of it. But if they know that it is possible, and yeah.
All right. So where do you see the Elman Peace and Human Rights Center in the near future? What can we sort of, I guess hope for or expect?
Well, I think that for almost the last 2 decades, our focus, and again, because of the situation in Somalia, is we've been working strongly in emergency response and life saving interventions. But I think as things are somewhat as slow as they may be, are improving, we'd like to start working in prevention so that you don't just respond to the women that are being subjected to violence or to the children that are being recruited, but you put in place mechanisms that can actually prevent these things from happening. So whether that's more in the legal framework of things or whether it's focusing on advocacy to make sure that supporters and international donors or people who are working with Somalia for a better future prioritize prevention mechanisms.
All right, awesome. And finally, can you just, I guess, tell our viewers, how we can learn more about the center, where we can go to learn more?
Yes, I mean, we're very active, like I said, on Facebook, and you can go on our Facebook page at Elman Peace and Human Rights Center. We're also on Twitter, Elman Peace Center, and our website currently is under construction, but we are hoping to launch it again in 2 weeks, where we will be posting pictures, videos, blogs, and giving people really more of an understanding of what a day in life is like in Somalia and the people that we're helping and the strong need for their continued support. And for my program right now on Sister Somalia, that can be accessed at www.sistersomalia.org.
Fantastic. So thank you so much for joining us on Sahara TV. And we look forward to hearing even greater things that you guys are doing for the people of Somalia. So thank you very much, Ilwad. All right, viewers.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. That has been Ilwad Elman. She is the program director for the Elman Peace and Human Rights Center in Mogadishu, Somalia. So stay tuned for more. We have so much more coming up, including our Sahara TV talkback segment, taking your Skype calls. So stay tuned. Don't go anywhere.